Hi, it's Joss again. I'm here to review a new movie. And the next movie I'm going to be reviewing is for the new movie called Gotti, starring John Travolta. And it's about the very successful, very powerful mob boss that came into power. And this movie review is going to be a little bit different because normally for my movie reviews, I pretty much talk about the acting, the plot, and whether or not I like the movie or not. For this movie review, it's going to need a little bit more detail because there is some very specific reasons as to why this movie did not work. And I'm just going to tell you straight out, this movie was not that great, and there's some reasons behind why this movie is not that great, and I'm going to get to them. But first, I need to explain some of the production problems behind this movie. This is not a good sign because normally I do not talk about production problems behind a movie. But this movie had several production problems, and I'm going to get into them right now. First off, this movie was supposed to come out. This movie has been in the making since 2010. It is now 2018. This movie took 8 years to come out. This movie was supposed to be released a couple years ago, but it got dropped. And Lionsgate was supposed to release it last year, but again, it got dropped and it didn't come out. And this is never it's not a good sign when a movie is dropped and sold to another company. The second thing is, in 2010, different directors were attached to this movie. A different director was attached to this movie, and that director left the project, and another director came on. That is also not a good sign when a director leaves and then another director comes on, because that usually means the story, the plot, and the script is going to be all over the place. And another thing that's wrong with this movie, another production problem that happened with this movie. Originally, Joe Pesci was supposed to play a major role in this movie, and he was supposed to gain a lot of weight for a particular part in this movie. But the director turned around and switched him for a minor role. Joe Pesci sued the company, I guess, and there was this big feud. Joe Pesci left the project. At one point, Sylvester Stallone was supposed to be in this movie. That didn't happen. Al Pacino was supposed to be in this movie. That also did not happen. So this movie is pretty much a complete mess. There was tons of production problems behind this movie. And you can clearly see that there was tons of production problems behind this movie because, honestly, this movie sucked. This movie really didn't do a good job of portraying John Gotti, I don't think. And you know what? I'm just going to say something. The runtime on this movie is like an hour and 45 minutes. Now, this is a gangster type mob boss movie. This is a gangster movie. Most good gangster movies are 3 hours long. And they feel like maybe an hour and a half because of how quickly and well paced this is. This movie, however, did not go by that quickly. This movie was only an hour and 45 minutes, and it felt like 4 hours. This movie was not very well edited. And you know what? I have to talk about the score for this movie. It's rare that I talk about the score for the movie, for any movie I review, but I have to talk about the score for this movie. Most gangster movies, most good gangster movies like Scarface, Goodfellas, The Godfather, Casino, they all have really, really, really memorable scores. I cannot remember the score for this movie. The score for this movie is completely unmemorable. It's just very generic. And it just kind of sucks that it's generic. And another thing is the soundtrack to this movie. The soundtrack to this movie is really all over the place. Sometimes the soundtrack to this movie is really, really good. I'll tell you one of the best moments of the film, and it's not because of the film itself, it's because of the song they played. The House of the Rising Sun. They played The House of the Rising Sun, and that is the only good moment to the film. And some of the music worked, but other music was completely out of place. I'll give you an example of a completely out of place, random, poor choice of music for this movie. This movie was supposed to be taking place in the 1970s, and it had a Pitbull song and a montage scene in the 1970s. Now, I can understand why they chose that particular song, but I've taken classes before. I've taken film classes and acting classes, and I've taken a whole bunch of classes on film in general. And in those classes, my professor says it is important to stay consistent with the time period that you're in. You can't have music in the 1970s that is from the 2000s. It doesn't make any logical sense. So I don't know. I understand why they chose the music because they felt it fit the scene, but you also have to think about consistency within the time period in which the movie is taking place. And it really didn't make sense to have a Pitbull rap music song in the 1970s, 1980s, whenever this movie was taking place. Okay, then it did not make sense. I said before, the editing to this movie was really, really terrible. This movie jumped time randomly. Again, most movies, when movies jump time normally, it makes sense. For this movie, it completely sucked the way they jumped time. One point in this movie is supposed to be in the 1970s, then it jumps to the 1990s, and then it jumps to the 1980s, back to 1970s, back to 1990s. This movie's all over the place. Trust me. Oh, man. And the dialogue, again, it is where, when I talk about the dialogue to the movie, this movie had some of the cheesiest dialogue. I actually wrote some dialogue down so I can remember it. Here is an example of some really, really terrible dialogue. John Travolta is talking to his son, and he's really mad about it at his son, and he just says, "I'm gonna punch you sideways." That is a terrible line. "I'm gonna punch you sideways." Terrible, terrible line. And terrible line delivery. Oh my goodness. And another example, I had to look this up to see if this was a real quote. One of the characters in the movie, because this is based on a true story, one of the characters in this movie said, "The boss is the boss is the boss." That's one of the lines to this movie. The boss is the boss is the boss. I had to look it up to see if it was a real quote in history because it just seems so random and out of place. And I Googled it, and when I Googled it, I could not find "the boss is the boss is the boss" by any of the character, any real life character, because it's just a terrible line. I'm being completely honest. It's a terrible, terrible line. Now, this is my favorite. John Travolta is talking to somebody about somebody got shot, and John Travolta just randomly says, "Well, the Caesar salads are to die for." I'm being completely serious. Oh my goodness. It just hurts. This dialogue just hurts. Because somebody's talking to John Travolta who plays John Gotti in the movie, about suing somebody, and his response to that is, well, the Caesar salads are to die for. Oh my goodness. This movie is really bad. And the acting to this movie. Listen, I really, really like John Travolta in some movies. He was good in Pulp Fiction. He was good in Hairspray. He was good in Grease. But he goes back and forth to being good and to being way over the top in this movie. There are some scenes where the first 5 minutes of the movie, he did a pretty good job. And then it just goes downhill from there. I mean, I'm talking, this is Battlefield Earth quality acting. It just sucks. And his real life wife was in the movie, Kelly Preston, and I was hearing some pretty terrible things about this movie. This movie currently sits at 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, so I am not the only one to dislike this movie. A lot of other people dislike this movie. And I at least thought that John Travolta and Kelly Preston, they play husband and wife in the movie, and a real life husband and wife. I really thought that they would have some good chemistry, but honestly, they have the chemistry of oil and water. They have no chemistry whatsoever, and it was just painful to watch. I actually got up and left several times in this movie because I was so bored by this movie. And there were times in this movie that it was so unintentionally funny that I had to stifle back laughter because there was one other person in this movie besides me, and I had to hold back laughter so I didn't disturb the other person in this movie, in this movie theater. And if they were not in the movie theater, I would have busted out laughing at some of the stupid dialogue like I mentioned previously. Like the stuff about the Caesar salad, I would have busted out laughing. I really had to stifle back laughter. And it was getting towards the end of the movie, and this other person that was in the movie theater with me, left. So he must have hated the movie too. And I'm not kidding. The pacing of this movie, I mentioned previously that this movie felt like it was 4 hours long. It really did. At one point in this movie, I looked at my phone to see just how much time has passed since I started watching the movie. I thought it was maybe like halfway through the movie. I'm being completely serious. I'm not exaggerating. I thought it was halfway through the movie. It was only 25 minutes into this hour and 45-minute movie. So this movie has a very, 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 very good reason not to be liked. I wouldn't be surprised if this movie gets a Razzie nomination because of how terrible it was. And this movie was just completely awful and completely all over the place. And this movie is the worst gangster movie I've ever seen. People talk about Gangster Squad being a terrible, terrible gangster movie. No. This is a terrible gangster mob movie. I never want to hear people complain about Gangster Squad ever again. And to be fair, Gangster Squad is not that great, but if you compare Gangster Squad to this movie makes Gangster Squad look like Casino. I'm being completely serious. I'm very sorry. I know it's one of my longer reviews, but I just had to talk about this movie. This movie was terrible, and it uh, I'm just gonna give this movie an F and close this video out because this is one of my longer videos. So this movie gets an F. Terrible, terrible, terrible movie. I do not recommend this movie. Bye.